So for us, when we look at that, it's like, what story perhaps are we carrying around about ourselves? You know, Myrtle Fillmore again, she talked about how she was told from the time she was a little girl that she was going to have tuberculosis because people in her family had it, and she just inherited it. And that's why that phrase for her, I am a child of God and I do not inherit sickness. She somehow was able to release that blueprint and step into something bigger. Now, we talked a bit about physical healing, but I also want to talk a bit about emotional healing as well. And there is a book called Healing Through the Dark Emotions by Miriam Greenspan. And one of the things that she says is that because of what's happening on the planet globally, that we are affected by the grief, by the despair, by the fear that is out in the world, whether we're paying attention to it or not, whether we're watching the news or not. It is sort of like in the thought bubble, if you will, of the planet, and it begins then to affect us. We just had the tornado in Alabama. It wiped out an entire town. You know, I mean, we're still like, we're having the concert for Japan to raise money for the tsunami, and it's like, okay, these things are kind of happening a lot, aren't they? And the truth is that it does affect us. And what she says is that the only way to authentically let go of an emotion is to let it be. And that dark emotions aren't good or bad, they simply are. But it takes a spiritual discipline in order to be with the emotion and allow it to be transformed. And her theory is that as we each are willing to feel, whether it be grief or the dark emotions as she calls them, and she's not talking about dramatizing them and spilling them all over and being a drama queen. It's more about feeling it, being with it, and transforming it into love. And that as we take it and transform it into love, we lift up the planet. I want to share with you specifically what she says. Huge mushroom clouds of alchemicalized dark emotions afflict us in our time, transmitted transpersonally to all of us in some form. The sensitives among us are carriers of these emotions who hold dark emotional energy in their bodies, often unaware, putting them at risk for a host of mind-body ailments. We cannot and should not expect to be completely cured of grief, fear, and despair in a broken-hearted world. We are not here to be free of pain. We are here to have our hearts broken by life and to transform our pain into love. So how many of you here feel like you're a sensitive? Like you feel what's going on, even if you're not watching the news, even if you didn't know there was a tornado that wiped out a town. I mean, and so her call to us is not to run from that and not to numb it, but to be with it, to transform the pain into love. So again, we have the gift of the East and the West right now. We have the gift of incredible medical technology. We have the gift of prayer and healing. We have the gift of the wisdom of shamans, the wisdom of the ancient Chinese people. And it's all kind of mixing and blending together in our country. And what a wonderful time to be alive. And I want to share a little bit of the story of Kathleen. She said I could have permission to tell some of her story, and I was been reading her blog about a new procedure that has been discovered for MS. And there's a doctor, his name is Paolo Zamboni, and he's in Italy, and his wife has MS, and he dedicated himself to easing her suffering. And what he discovered is that there's a narrowing of the blockage of veins that prevent the brain from properly draining the oxygenated blood and toxins. And so an angioplasty will clear that. And so Kathleen has shared a Facebook page and is networking with many people in how to get this information and to share it, and no longer waiting for the studies to be done, or waiting for like, okay, we'll take you in maybe in 2012, we'll let you in and figure it out. And it's like, because of the way we're living in our world right now, that we can gather the information, we can make the connections, we can do the research, and we can step out in faith and try these different experiments, experiences, procedures, whatever you want to call it. And it is being met with success. So it's an amazing thing, and I'm sure Kathleen would be happy to share her Facebook page and her stories with you. That it's quite amazing. Probably one of the most important things is that if you do find yourself in dis-ease and disorder physically or emotionally, to be patient with yourself and to love yourself, because we don't need to use these teachings to beat ourselves up for having a physical experience, but rather to practice loving kindness. Practice loving kindness towards ourselves. So in closing, there's a short story I want to share with you, and it's called The Cracked Pot. Not the crack pot, but The Cracked Pot. And it's about this old Chinese woman who had two large vessels, and she would go down, two large pots, and she would go down to the river every day to gather water. And these things were heavy, and she'd fill them up, and then she would make her way back up the hill carrying these heavy pots. Well, one of the pots was cracked, and so the water would seep out. So by the time she got home, there was only half a pot of water. And she did this day after day after day for 2 years. Now the pot, who never spilled the water, felt very proud, like, hey, I'm doing a good job. The other pot felt ashamed and like he had let her down. And after 2 years, he apologizes to her and he goes, I'm so sorry. And she said, for what? And he said, you know, every day you go down and you get water, you get to the top of the hill, and the water is, half the water is gone because it's cracked. And she said, yes, that's true. However, if you look at the side of the road where the water has been seeping out, you will see flowers all up and down. Because as the water was seeping out, I planted seeds, and every day you watered those seeds, and now I have flowers for my home. The truth is that as we seek our healing, we may feel like a cracked pot, not a cracked pot, but a cracked pot, where we're not perfect and things aren't going exactly as we think they should, and yet it is through that cracking that flowers are in bloom. We would not have the unity movement if Myrtle Fillmore didn't have tuberculosis, if she wasn't cracked and fallible in some way. You know, when each one of us steps up to the healing of emotions, the healings of physical healings, we may feel that we're cracked, but we're leaving flowers. We're leaving flowers in our wake. So my prayer for this month is that we all be healed, and not only physically, emotionally, spiritually, individually, but collectively and globally. Because we cannot, we're a hologram, we cannot make a change and a move without it affecting the whole. May you be healed. Amen.